Julian Sterling sat at the head of the obsidian conference table, staring blankly at the projection screen. The projected figures for the Swiss merger blurred into a meaningless grey haze before his tired eyes. He checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes, watching the second hand sweep past the 12. A profound silence roared in his ears, drowning out the monotonous drone about quarterly profits. He realized suddenly that he couldn't remember the last time he had felt anything real. "Cancel it," Julian said, his voice cutting through the sterile air like a serrated knife. The room froze, 10 heads turning in unison to look at their CEO in complete disbelief. His assistant, Marcus, stammered a nervous protest about the vital importance of the scheduled delegation. Julian stood up abruptly, the legs of his expensive leather chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I am going home immediately, and I do not wish to be disturbed by anyone." He did not wait for the elevator, choosing instead to take the stairs down 3 flights. The physical exertion helped to burn off the sudden spike of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He burst into the lobby, ignoring the startled greetings of the security staff who were not used to seeing him before sunset. The automatic doors slid open, hitting him with a blast of humid, rainy air. He felt a desperate, magnetic pull toward his house that he could not explain. Traffic in the city was a gridlocked river of red taillights and blaring horns. Julian bypassed his waiting limousine, knowing the driver would ask polite questions he did not have the patience to answer. He threw himself into the back of a yellow taxi and barked his address at the driver. "I will give you $500 if you get me there in 20 minutes, he promised. The driver nodded, eyes widening, and merged aggressively into the bus lane. Rain lashed against the windows, distorting the city into a watercolor painting of gray and steel. Julian drummed his fingers on the cracked vinyl armrest, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He pulled his phone from his pocket to check the nursery cameras, needing to see his daughter. The screen loaded for a second before flashing a red error message. The connection to the house was completely dead. Panic began to rise in his throat, tasting like copper and old fear. He refreshed the app again and again, but the result remained the same stubborn black screen. It had been 6 months since his wife Alina had passed away, leaving him alone with Sophie. He had buried his grief in work, leaving the raising of his child to a string of nannies. Now, the silence from his phone felt like a judgment. The taxi skidded around a wet corner, the tires screeching on the asphalt. Julian stared out at the passing suburbs, which usually looked manicured and peaceful. Today, under the storm clouds, the hedges looked like walls and the houses like fortresses. He felt like a stranger invading his own life. The dread in his stomach hardened into a certainty that something was wrong. "We are here," the driver announced, pulling up to the imposing wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate. Julian threw a wad of cash onto the front seat without counting it. He scrambled out of the car before it had come to a complete stop. The rain soaked his bespoke suit instantly, plastering his shirt to his skin. He ran toward the keypad mounted on the brick pillar. He punched in the code, his fingers slipping on the wet plastic keys. The light on the panel flashed red, denying him entry to his own home. He cursed loudly, wiping the rain from his eyes and trying the code again. It flashed red a second time, mocking his memory and his absence. He realized with a jolt of shame that he might have changed it during a drunken night of grief. There was no time to call the security company or wait for a locksmith. Julian grabbed the iron bars of the gate and began to climb. He ruined his Italian shoes on the metal scrollwork and tore his trousers on a sharp spike. He vaulted over the top, landing heavily on the wet driveway on the other side. He ignored the pain in his ankles and began to run toward the house. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and silent against the charcoal sky. All the blinds were drawn, shutting out the faint afternoon light. It looked abandoned, like a mausoleum where time had stopped. Julian sprinted up the stone steps, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He pounded his fist against the heavy oak front door. "Elida," he shouted, calling the name of the new maid he had hired only a month ago. There was no answer from inside, only the hollow echo of the wood. He tried the handle, but it was locked tight. He remembered the spare key Alina had insisted on hiding in the planter. He fell to his knees, digging frantically through the wet mulch. His fingers brushed against the plastic fake rock, and he nearly sobbed with relief. He fumbled the key into the lock, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. The tumblers clicked, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet afternoon. He threw the door open and stumbled into the grand foyer. The air inside was stale and cold. "Sophie," he yelled, his voice cracking with the intensity of his fear. The house swallowed the sound, offering nothing in return but shadows. He ran to the living room, scanning the pristine white furniture for any sign of life. It was empty, the cushions undisturbed and perfect. He checked the dining room, but the table was bare. He took the stairs 2 at a time, gripping the banister to pull himself up faster. The nursery was at the end of the long hallway on the 2nd floor. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness. He burst into the room, his eyes flying immediately to the crib. The mattress was stripped, and the bed was empty. He spun around, checking the changing table and the ensuite bathroom. There were no baby clothes, no diapers, no sign of his daughter. A stuffed rabbit lay face down on the carpet, looking abandoned. Julian felt his knees go weak, forcing him to grab the doorframe for support. Had she been taken? He turned to run back downstairs, his mind racing through terrible scenarios. Then, he heard a sound drifting up from the lower level. It was a low, rhythmic humming coming from the back of the house. It sounded primitive and deep, unlike anything he had heard before. He froze, straining his ears to locate the source. The sound was coming from the kitchen, the heart of the home he rarely entered. He moved silently down the hallway, the predator instinct taking over his panic. He descended the servants' stairs, which led directly to the pantry. The humming grew louder, accompanied by the sound of splashing water. Someone was in his house. He paused outside the double-swinging doors of the kitchen. He could hear the clink of glass against porcelain. The voice was singing a melody that was haunting and strange. He clenched his fists, preparing for violence. He took a deep breath and kicked the doors open. The scene before him was so surreal that his mind struggled to process the visual data. The kitchen was dimly lit by the gray light from the garden window. Ilara stood at the deep farmhouse sink, her back to him. She was not wearing her uniform, but a simple white tunic. Steam rose around her, filling the air with a heavy scent. Julian took a step forward, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The sink was filled with water, but it was not clear. It was a vibrant, glowing turquoise blue that looked unnatural. In the center of this blue pool sat his 8-month-old daughter. She was submerged up to her chest, motionless. Ilara was holding a blue glass bottle in her hand. She tilted it, pouring a thick dark liquid over Sophie's head. The liquid ran down the baby's face, staining her skin and dripping into her eyes. Sophie did not blink or cry out. She simply stared ahead, looking trance-like. "Get away from her," Julian screamed, the sound tearing from his throat like a wild animal. Ilara jumped violently, the blue bottle slipping from her wet fingers. It crashed into the porcelain sink, shattering into jagged shards. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror as she saw him. She did not run away. Instead, she threw her body over the sink. She curled around Sophie, shielding the baby from Julian's advance. "Mr. Sterling," she gasped, her voice trembling with shock. "I didn't know you were coming home." Julian did not hear her words, only the pounding of his own heart. He lunged forward, grabbing Ilara by the shoulder and pulling her back. "What are you doing?" he roared, looking at the blue water. "What is that chemical? Why is she blue?" He looked frantically at his daughter, expecting burns or injuries. Sophie blinked and looked up at him, her eyes clear and calm. She reached a wet blue-tinted hand toward his face. She let out a small, happy gurgle that stopped Julian cold. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. The water smelled of sweet flowers, not bleach. "It is not a chemical," Ilara whispered, holding her hands up in surrender. "It is blue tansy oil and chamomile." Julian looked from the maid to the baby, confusion warring with his anger. "Why is she in the sink?" he demanded. "Why is the water blue?" "She has been screaming for 3 days, Ilara said, tears welling in her eyes. "She has colic, sir, and her stomach was hurting her. The nursery bath is too cold and too big. She hates it." Ilara wiped her wet hands on her apron. "I tried everything," the maid continued, her voice gaining strength. "I walked her, I rocked her, I gave her the drops. Nothing stopped the pain. She wouldn't eat, and she wouldn't sleep." Julian looked at Sophie, who was kicking her legs in the warm blue water. "So you dyed her?" Julian asked, his voice still harsh but the volume lowering. "I didn't decide to do it on my own," Ilara said. She pointed a shaking finger toward the kitchen island. Lying amidst the vegetables was a leather-bound book. "I found that under the mattress in the nursery," Ilara explained. "I was looking for a pacifier and I found the journal." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He recognized the worn leather cover instantly. It was Elena's diary. He walked over to the island, his legs feeling heavy and numb. He opened the book to the page Ilara had bookmarked with a spoon. It was Elena's handwriting, looping and blue. The title of the entry was "The Kitchen Sink Soak." He read the words his dead wife had written. "For when the baby is inconsolable and the world is too loud, use the deep sink because it holds the heat. Add blue tansy to make the water the color of the ocean. It surprises them into silence." The entry continued. "Sing the song about the moon and wash away the tears." Julian felt a lump form in his throat. hard and painful. He looked back at Elara, who was watching him fearfully. "You read her journal?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I had to," Elara said simply. "I am not a mother, Mr. Sterling. I needed her mother's help to know what to do." Julian looked at the sink where Sophie was splashing. The water was draining away, swirling down the pipe in a blue vortex. "And it worked?" he asked. "She stopped crying the moment the water turned blue." Elara nodded. Julian walked back to the sink and looked at the broken glass. "I broke the bottle," he said, feeling foolish. "It was the last of the oil," Elara noted sadly. "But at least she is calm now." He reached into the water and lifted his daughter out. She was slippery and warm, smelling of earth and flowers. She rested her head against his wetsuit jacket, staining the silk blue. He didn't care about the suit anymore. "I'm sorry," Julian said to Elara, not looking up. "I thought you were hurting her." "You are her father," Elara replied gently. "You are protecting her." He carried Sophie to the counter and laid her on a dry towel. "Show me how to dry her," he said. "I don't know the right way." Elara stepped forward and guided his hands. "You have to be gentle with the ears," she instructed. Julian wiped the blue water from behind Sophie's ears. The dye had stained her skin slightly, leaving a faint mark. "It will fade in a day or two," Elara promised. "I don't mind," Julian said, looking at the blue mark. "It looks like a tattoo." He wrapped the towel around Sophie, making a warm bundle. She yawned, her eyes heavy with sleep. "She hasn't slept more than an hour at a time for weeks," Elara said. "She misses the presence of her mother." Julian flinched at the truth of her words. "I haven't been here," he admitted. "You have been working," Elara said, trying to be kind. "I have been hiding," Julian corrected her. He sat on a kitchen stool, holding the baby close. "I couldn't stand the silence." "The book has many recipes," Elara said, touching the journal. "There is one for pancakes on Sunday mornings." Julian smiled weakly. "I remember those pancakes," he said. "We can make them," Elara suggested. "If you are home on Sunday." Julian looked at his phone, which sat on the counter, still dark. "I will be home," he said firmly. "I am not going back to the office," he continued, the decision cementing in his mind. "Not for a long time." Elara smiled, a genuine expression of relief. "Sophie will like that." "Does she know me?" Julian asked, looking at the sleeping baby. "She knows your voice," Elara said. "I tell her about you every day." Julian felt a tear slide down his cheek. "Thank you," he said to the maid, "for saving her." "It was just a bath," Elara demurred. "It was more than that," Julian insisted. He stood up, holding Sophie securely in his arms. "I'm going to take her up to the crib." "I can do it," Elara offered. "No," Julian said. "I need to do it." He walked out of the kitchen and back through the hallway. The house didn't feel so ominous now. The shadows were just shadows. He climbed the stairs slowly, savoring the weight of his daughter. He entered the nursery and approached the crib. He laid her down gently, tucking the blanket around her. She sighed in her sleep, a sound of perfect contentment. He pulled the rocking chair close to the bars. He sat down and watched her chest rise and fall. He saw the faint blue stain on her forehead. It was a mark of the day everything changed. He promised himself he would never forget it. Downstairs, he heard the sounds of Elara cleaning up the glass. It was a domestic sound, comforting and normal. The house had a heartbeat again. It wasn't just a building, it was a home. Julian took his phone out of his pocket and turned it on. Dozens of messages from Marcus flooded the screen. He typed a single reply: "I am taking paternity leave." He hit send and turned the phone off again. He picked up the stuffed rabbit from the floor. He placed it next to Sophie in the crib. She shifted and grabbed the rabbit's ear. Julian let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 6 months. He heard footsteps in the hallway. Elara appeared at the door, holding the journal. "I thought you might want to read this," she said. She placed the book on the nightstand. "Thank you," Julian whispered. He picked up the book and opened it. He began to read the pages, hungry for his wife's words. It was like having a conversation with her. The sun began to break through the clouds outside. A shaft of golden light hit the nursery floor. The storm had passed. The nightmare was over. He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of rain and blue tansy that lingered in the air. The millionaire who had left the office that morning was gone, replaced by her father. He listened to the rhythm of his daughter's breathing, matching it with his own. For the first time in 6 months, the silence of the house was not empty. Julian Sterling was finally home.